Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eric Smigel. I'm chair of Arts Alive SDSU, and I'd like to thank you for coming to the Learning to Fly panel discussion. We are recording this event, which will soon be available on our YouTube channel for those of you not able to attend this live webinar. We'll begin the proceedings with the Kumeyaay land acknowledgement. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. I am so pleased to welcome you to this 6th production in this year's Arts Alive SDSU Discovery Series, which is an annual selection of events that address socio-political and cultural issues through the visual and performing arts. We're delighted to continue our partnership this semester with One SDSU, who is sponsoring these interdisciplinary panel discussions. And I'd like to thank Amaris Gonzalez and the team at the Center for Student Organizations and Activities for their ongoing support of arts programming across campus. Today's discussion focuses on Learning to Fly, an art exhibit, bookmaking project, and dance performance based on original designs by artists experiencing incarceration. Inspired by Wallace Stevens's poem, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, the exhibition and performance focus on transformation and restoration and celebrate creative expression as a basic human right that can connect communities. This very project has connected several academic and professional communities, and we're delighted to be joined by representatives from the SDSU School of Art and Design, the School of Music and Dance, the School of Public Affairs, the Prison Arts Collective, Project Rebound, as well as the Center for Book Arts in New York. It's now my pleasure to welcome the moderator for this discussion, Professor Annie Buckley, who will introduce the panelists. Annie?
Thank you, Eric. Thank you everyone for being here to celebrate this incredible collaboration. I see like about 230 people here, so it's so amazing to have you here and welcome. So I see that a few people had hands raised, so just so you know, you can use the Q&A format and we will get to your questions. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but we will get to as many as we can. I am Annie Buckley. I'm the founder and director of Prison Arts Collective and the director of the Institute for Arts, Humanities, and Social Justice here at SDSU, and a professor in School of Art and Design and a fellow in Division of Research and Innovation. So across multiple platforms. Really excited to be here today with this illustrious panel to celebrate this incredible collaboration. I had the opportunity to go into the gallery today to see the exhibition along with one of the student artists who was able to really share more about it. And I'm really eager for all of you to learn more about this project. It was a collaboration between students in the university and in the prisons and engages visual art, poetry, dance, bookmaking, printmaking, dialogue, and in an empathetic visual exchange. So thank you to Eric and Elizabeth at Arts Alive for hosting this and so many amazing interdisciplinary panels and events here at SDSU. And thank you to everyone on our panel, and most particularly to Michelle and Jess, who are the first faculty associates for Prison Arts Collective here at SDSU. So it's been my pleasure to work with them for the past couple of years. And when they first brought this idea, I was so excited, and it's just been a really heartfelt and thoughtful and exciting exchange. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'm going to read a short bio on each of them and ask them to wave so you know who's who, and then we will dive in and you will get to hear from them and not so much from me. So I'm going to begin with Michelle Burgett. Oh, is she? Oh, I'm not going to begin with Michelle. I'm going to, she's in traffic from another panel, but we'll be here shortly. I'm going to begin with Jess Humphrey. Hi, Jess. Jess is an associate professor of dance in the School of Music and Dance and has been a faculty associate with Prison Arts Collective since 2020 and co-organized this project. She makes dance to leverage the profound healing, developmental, and spiritual potentials of human beings moving together, attending to space, time, and bodies, and deepening their relationships with one another and the world through tenderness and vulnerability elicited by the creative process. And she has co-created and performed numerous local and national performances and is a registered somatic movement therapist. So thank you, Jess. And we have Dr. Alan Mobley, hello, who is a professor of criminal justice here at SDSU. His teaching and writing explore the many dimensions of justice system involvement, particularly the experience of prison and its aftermath. As a researcher and activist, he is co-founder of Convict Criminology, All of Us or None, SDSU Project Rebound, and the CSU Project Rebound Consortium, a support program for formerly incarcerated students. Current projects include expanding higher education offerings in the Cal State prisons, leading trainings for incarcerated men and women in the way of counsel, and a peer facilitated circle dialogue offered in 20 California prisons. So thank you. And I'm going to go to James Phillip. Hi, James. James is a student in psychology here at SDSU with a minor in criminal justice and a member of Project Rebound. James is an advocate for social justice reform and a returned citizen dedicated to making way for the next generation. He's a junior and will graduate in 2023, and James has been involved in community outreach through education and mentoring while assisting formerly incarcerated people in their transition back into society. So welcome, James. And we have from New York, this is one of the beautiful things about virtual panels, Karina Reynolds. So welcome. Karina is the executive director of the New York Center for the Book in New York City, where she connects artists across distance and time through a diverse program of exhibitions, panels, conferences, and classes. Her passion for the art of the book has led her to curate exhibitions, organize conferences and panels, publish books, and teach about book arts in the US and abroad. And she is an alumna of SDSU. So welcome, Karina. And we will introduce, I'll go ahead and read Michelle so we don't have to pause. And the last panelist who will join us soon, who organized the book project and exhibition, is Michelle Burgess, a lecturer of book arts in the School of Art and Design and the organizer of the book and exhibition. She works in book arts, printmaking, painting, and sculpture, and is the director of Brighton Press, where she collaborates with artists and poets on projects that involve the book as an art medium. Her artist books are housed in over 75 public collections across the country and have been exhibited internationally. She teaches here at SDSU and at USD and has been a faculty associate with us in Prison Arts Collective since 2020. So we will welcome her as soon as she pops on, and we are going to go ahead and jump into some questions. So when we sent this call, so we sent the call for this exhibition out to artists participating in Prison Arts Collective classes across 12 prisons in the state of California. And at first we didn't get very many responses, but over time they started to pour in, and it was really exciting to see each one a new piece of art that came in. And each of them was a response to a stanza from 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And ultimately 38 artists sent in works that are on view in the gallery, and 13 are included in the book. But before we dive into that, I want to start with you, Alan, and see if you could just share with everyone some context about how these kinds of arts and writing and programs, as well as this kind of interchange in California prisons, has evolved in recent years.
Sure, my pleasure. And maybe our story starts back in the 1970s, when California had around 17,000 prisoners in its state prison system. And that's when what scholars refer to as the tough on crime era began. And so we saw a steady increase in the number of prisons in the state, as well as the number of prisoners peaking out, I think, at about 170,000 prisoners. So a tenfold increase by 2006. So during that time, of getting tough, sentences were lengthened, opportunities to earn good time and early release all but disappeared, and assistance with release planning and reentrance into the community was really scaled back as well. The focus was on what's been come to be known as mass incarceration. And this occurred across the United States, but California really stood out for the scope and the scale of what they were doing. And it got so bad that that the governor at the time, Gray Davis, was facing a recall from voters because voters were thinking that the state's going in the wrong direction, and with one of the big markers of that being the exploded and bloated prison system. And the governor had a very close connection with the Prison Guards Union. They were his largest campaign contributor. And there was a sense that there was something not right with that. And so Arnold Schwarzenegger was one of the individuals who challenged Gray Davis, saying that that things need to change, and the prison system is one of the things that needs to change the fastest. And as we know, Davis was removed, Schwarzenegger became governor, and California Department of Corrections became California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And so then the focus really turned on getting people out of there, reducing overcrowding, and ramping up programs. And so ironically, the first thing they did was get rid of all the programs in order to put each one under a microscope from what they considered to be an evidence base, and then invite programs back in kind of one at a time on the basis of that they'd be good for the population in the prison to keep things relatively calm and nonviolent in the prison, but also to equip people for rehabilitation and eventual reentry into the community. And so as programs were being reintroduced, a new focus on the arts really began to emerge. And so now we have virtually every type of art, from painting to songwriting, other types of music and dance and movement. We're really in what could be considered a golden age, relatively speaking, for programs in prison. And at least for the state of California, there's this strong indication that if the program is being allowed in the prison, if it's being permitted to take up the valuable time and the valuable real estate of the prison environment, then it's thought to really have an impact. So I think that's where we stand now with art.
Thank you so much. It's so informative and so interesting to hear, for everyone, the context of where these sit. And I will say Prison Arts Collective is lucky to be one of, I think it's about almost 30 arts and corrections programs here in California, sponsored by California Arts Council through a collaboration with CDCR. Now, just briefly, Alan, is it correct that it was Schwarzenegger who added the R to CDCR, or is that something that I've misheard over the years? The R being rehabilitation. It is. Okay.
Yes, it is correct that in the time Schwarzenegger came in, he was talking about, his phrase at the time was blowing up boxes, that he really wants to create big change. And adding that R was one of the big changes. And as we know, bringing higher education back into the state prisons in face-to-face learning, a project that Annie and I are currently working on with others, that also got its start during that time, the Schwarzenegger administration, and is carried forward. In addition, we have the program that James and I are affiliated with, Project Rebound, which is now on 14 Cal State University campuses. And I'm currently sitting in the Project Rebound Lounge here at San Diego State. So yeah, all of this has been a part of taking California from being one of the harshest and most draconian prison systems in the country. And it still has a long way to go. I don't want to mislead anyone to think that the things are heavenly in Nirvana right now, but it has come a long way, and we're certainly pointed in the right direction with this new inclusion of higher education programs, other education, and arts programs.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And so for folks who are not familiar, so CDCR is California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and the R being that rehabilitation at the end. So thank you for that. I was like, is that true? So thank you. So I'm gonna go to James to share a little bit, expanding maybe from the point of view of individual experience or communal experience. Can you talk a little bit about what these kinds of arts programs and the types of programs that Alan was speaking about mean to people experiencing incarceration? You know, not of course that you could speak for everyone, but from your experience and those that you know, why might someone choose to be part of a project like this, and how might that impact them?
Well, it definitely helps the artist slash inmate get in touch with their feelings and express themselves. I mean, it's in a place where expressing your pain or your displeasure or your sorrow is frowned upon. You know, you don't interact with your fellow inmates and talk about how sad you are. You know, so any expression of emotion, whether it's anger or sadness, is really just going to be repressed. So when you get involved with the arts, it allows you to intermingle with other sections that you wouldn't intermingle with. Because I would have to say that being on a prison yard is like the old Jim Crow South. You don't interact with other races. You stick with your own. So, and it's quite a depressing place. And the doctors, they don't go around and do a survey of people and say, well, how are you feeling today? In order for anybody to get any kind of help, it has to be extreme, like really extreme, to where you would run from the person if you saw them. And the arts, they give people a chance to really just let go of their pain. So when I was really involved with the players, and my place started off, talking, writing about my crime and the pain I experienced when I was young, and then eventually, after enough plays, that changed into something else. It changed into something that I could be proud of instead of just releasing my pain, even though I'm still proud of that, because it was a process that I needed to go through in order to come to some type of, accepting responsibility, accepting myself for who I am now, recognizing change, and helping other people. I brought a lot of people into the program, and the majority of people, they don't reach that level. So I think that arts, it's probably one of the things that helped me get to where I am now. Without meeting everybody that I met through these programs, I wouldn't be sitting right here today. I wouldn't be in school right now. And so it's the arts are probably the linchpin, the key to the rehabilitative process in prison.
That's really amazing. I'll just add, it also wouldn't be without your effort. You wouldn't. That's the key thing that brought you here. But yes, all of that that's really helpful and interesting. I hear that, from folks a lot, that they're like, wait, what do you mean? How do I feel? Wait, what? Like, it takes them a minute to think through that question, because they're not, like you say, it's not part of the norm of the experience. So to bring that into the conversations through the arts, it not only gives them a chance to speak about it, but to even just access and really think for themselves, well, how do I feel? Is that kind of, am I hearing that correctly from what you're saying?
Yes, partly, but I think it's more, everybody has feelings. You can try to hide them, but what I'm saying is that they're repressed. Because when you're behind that wall, you have to have on pseudo armor at all times. In church, you have to have on pseudo armor. Walk in the yard, going to chow, whatever your daily activity is. If you're going to school, you have to have on pseudo armor. And you don't associate with anybody else. You have to keep that armor up. But when you go into these rooms that are meant for you to express yourself, I've seen it in everybody I invited. I've seen that armor slowly come down. They crack a smile, they make a new friend, and somebody that they would probably be disciplined for associating with you know, in the regular general population. But inside those rooms where there's art, music, writing plays, you actually become a regular community. I mean, it may somewhat disappear when you go back out that door, but inside those rooms with the guest teachers and any other participants, you are definitely a different person for those hours.
Thank you so much for sharing that and expanding on it. That's really, yeah, that's great to hear. And I think it's important for people to see and hear what that's like from that experience of being inside if they're not familiar with that. So let's frame a little bit what this project is. So we're gonna go, if Jess and Michelle maybe could together tell us a little bit about just what it was that happened. I know I did just a little bit in the beginning, but if you could speak a little bit about just the project as a whole, that would be great.
Should I go first? I wanted to do a collaborative project between my students and the participants in Prison Arts Collective, which would be the artists that are experiencing incarceration right now, that are reaching out and making art. And I just wanted to further that bridge to my students and help them develop empathy. I know that when I was in art school, the friendships you make in art school, because artists are often, you know, the odd ones in the rest of the environment in school or even in the world, that when we were in together making art, like James said, the friendships were based on whether you were dedicated to your vision and curious and all those kind of great qualities. Not, I don't like your art or I don't like your art. It's, you're serious about art and so am I. And I had a feeling that could happen between artists, even inside versus outside. So I decided to do a project based on a poem by Wallace Stevens, which is called 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And it's really a poem about, you can look at, first of all, you can look at the same thing and think 13 different things about it, or 13 different people are going to see the same thing and have 13 different responses, and all about the same thing. And it's all about all these various points of view, which can kind of create this jewel of an idea together, or a vision together, a multifaceted vision. So we sent out a call for entries to all the prisons that Pat works with, asking them to read the poem. And we gave examples of different drawings that had been done, because I'd done the same project with my class before. And we started receiving submissions. And this was during COVID, when, you know, nobody could go inside. So we were just sending these in there and then waiting for things to come back out through the mail. And it was just magical to receive these images, and all different kinds. I mean, some were on canvas with paint, some were on the back of an envelope with a pencil. And they're all hanging in this gallery behind me right now. All the different viewpoints, including my students, which are in the mix, but all of them are labeled with first names, so you can't tell who is who or anything. And there's just they're both correspondences and contrasts that are incredibly resonant and poignant. And then in addition to that, we created an artist book, which is one of my specialties, and it's my favorite real medium for expression. And I'd always wanted to teach book arts in the prisons in order to get the stories out. And I thought it was a beautiful vehicle for honoring a person's story, but also sharing it. So we decided to do that. And I told my students to respond to the poem as well. But I didn't show them the ones that came from inside yet. And then we put them all up and we could not believe the correspondences, especially in the areas where there's abstraction going on. There's one stanza I'll show you. Well, I can show you the book. But anyway, so we chose 13 of the pack pieces, and there are 13 stanzas, and I actually had 13 students. The images are side by side in the book with the stanza of the poem in between, like a soft barrier, like a cloudy window kind of thing. And I can show that, can leaf through that right now if you think it's a good time. Okay.
Yeah.
I can't believe it exists because the pack participants were a lot more organized than my students as it happened. And it was really hard to get them to turn things in on time. But not only did they do their own image as a stencil, which is a medium called pochoir, but they also reinterpreted the pack participants' drawing in pochoir as well, like printers do, printers for artists. So let me see here. Okay.
Yeah, maybe show like a few pages. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe, while you show it, maybe Jess could speak about the dance portion? Does that sound good? Or do we
What
wanna-
portion?
The dance.
Oh, yeah. Well, I
Okay.
could,
So no, you show. We'll look at
Okay.
images.
Yeah, and then we'll
It'll be
talk about
so
the dance.
fun. Yeah.
because Jess Humphrey then looked at some of the pack participants' images, and she and her dance company created an interpretive dance based on not just the poem, but the prison artists' work and commentary that they made, which was amazing. So
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I really want to give space to looking at what Michelle's showing and just have that be the only thing happen, if that's okay. So Michelle, can you show some of those in a little bit?
oh
Just
yeah,
to
for
explore
sure.
what- Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also was hoping, if it's okay, Annie, to show a little video early on in what I'm saying, because one of the things that we worked with is, it's so beautiful that Michelle, that you had everyone use first names, and there's this thing around identity and whose work is whose, and we can't quite tell. And with the dancers, the jig is up, right? That body is the one doing the dance. And so there's also in the early process, not wanting to stay too long with the words and not wanting to analyze too much, and to get more kind of initial impressions. And it was really hard for the dancers because they really felt like they needed to get the poem. And we wanted to make material in our bodies before we saw the works. And so every time they make the dance, it's being made. There are some set sections that are the same every time, and even those are not the same every time. And what I'm really excited about is there's some works they haven't seen. They haven't seen any of the students' work. So when they are in the gallery, we are going to set up a situation where they're seeing it for the first time. I haven't told Michelle this yet, but I want to see if there's a way we can cover some things when we rehearse tomorrow, so that there are some responses that happen live in the performance, because that aliveness was really important to the process. And I just want to really credit Michelle, because it was such a gift to be part of this process and just follow what Michelle was doing. All I had to do is say, okay, where's the art? Okay, good. And just, I felt so much freedom. But also Michelle and I had some conversations about a few of the pieces, and I felt really connected, even though we haven't been in the same room and there wasn't dialogue between the dancers and the other artists. And I think that was kind of magical in this case. I'm excited for them to meet now, but I really appreciated this constant back and forth, but not being in the same room together and not being in conversation together. So the back and forth was purely through the process and the works, and then also the kind of third person perspective of everyone looking at the same poem and feeling into the same poem. So I wanted to show just a clip of one of the sections. Annie, if that's okay.
It's okay as long as I didn't know it, so I don't know if the tech is set up, but if the tech
Yeah.
works, it's fine by me.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Let me just find this one. Here we go. All right. And I'm going to move this down here so it's hopefully a little out of the way. I am back. Sorry.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's so great to see. I can't wait to see the performance.
Thanks, Annie. Yeah, it was, there's something about trying to keep the dancers from dropping into something too literal too soon. And when the lighting designer first saw the piece at the end of the process, right before we performed, she started pulling up all these images of the birds that are flocking together, because they end up doing this flocking in the piece too. So it was really nice to see some of the images come up kind of through the back door, not going directly at them. And then also the costumes, I was really surprised at how inspired the dancers were. They each kind of connected with different pieces. And when they went into the costume shop to pull pieces, they were like, okay, stay with me. See this top? Here's the bird, here's the human, here's the nature, like just like kind of pointing to different things from the poem, and then different images from the works. And at the end, there's that clip, there's right before they hit the wall, there's something we call a room tilt. So all the dancers are kind of looking up and it's like the whole room tilts and they all fall as if the whole room is tilting toward that wall. And that was inspired by one of the works where the walls didn't look so flat. And they were kind of trying to put themselves in some ways physically into what they were seeing in the drawings. And we talked about how it was like, no, we're not going to try and put ourselves physically into the prisons, but instead, like, how do we kind of feel into what space and place are, with the drawings. So that was just one little piece that happened in there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's so interesting. And yeah, there's the piece. So we're getting to see
the
some as
drawing
we
you're talking
go.
about?
Yeah.
It
So,
totally is. Oh my God. See, that's crazy. She doesn't know that, but now yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
So,
You know what?
someone is asking-
The eye of this shadow
Mm-hmm.
has a little tiny bird in it with bars in front of it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's just so inspired and
Yeah.
fantastic.
So there's so many amazing pieces, and I hope people will get to see it on campus, and we'll look at the book in just a second. And I want to get to Karina here to speak about the book. One thing that I noticed as you were speaking, and we're hearing more so about the prison system and rehabilitation, and then this art project, so kind of weaving them together, is the fact that, yes, this was during COVID when I met you all, and I came to San Diego State like 6 months before the pandemic. So I was almost only remote most of my time here and working with all of you. And then our programs, we had some 20 some odd classes across the state of California that all shut down and all had to shift to distance learning. So we were in the process of creating literally thousands of distance learning packets that we were sending into the prisons, trying to make them engaging, trying to make them interesting, which when you go from a live arts experience with outside, faculty and students to just sitting on your own and receiving a packet and maybe not having even the literacy skills for in some cases to access them, it was quite difficult. So this process of just sending out a poem and making a response really opened things up in a really beautiful way that I think made it accessible to more people. But yet, they're locked inside there, and like you're saying, you didn't even necessarily, not to compare it all, but there was all these distances between people throughout this whole experience that I think were bridged in like really innovative ways. That was exciting to see. And yeah, so I think that it would be a good time to look at the book. And someone had suggested, but before we do, what time is the dance on Thursday? I believe it's 3 to 5. Is that correct? Okay, so thank you, Christy, for asking so that we can tell everyone. So yes, please come Thursday, 3 to 5 to see the art and hear from the students. No, is that not correct?
Yeah.
No, it's on next Tuesday from 3 to 5.
Okay, sorry, Tuesday.
And we
Next-
haven't decided exactly where the dance will happen within there.
Okay.
It'll probably be around 10 to 15 minutes. But we're figuring that out this week. So
Okay.
it'll be in there. It won't be
So-
right at 3.
So Tuesday, 3 to 5. And so, yeah, let's look at the book. And then I'm hoping that we can, after we have a look, invite Karina. This is your field of expertise, and yet not having been able to see any of this directly, if you can speak a bit about, the book as an object, as an art piece, and how it might be unique or different from other things you're seeing, or what it's doing in whatever way you'd like to speak about that. So Michelle, if you want to share it, and then we'll invite Karina to jump in. And someone suggested pinning you so that we could see it larger, which I thought was a great idea.
Somebody's gonna do that, right?
I don't know how to do that. I'm thinking that
Elizabeth.
perhaps. Oh,
it's-
beautiful. Thank you, Elizabeth.
So here's the title page. This is all hand set type. In several different fonts. The students chose their own font. And there they are paired up as first names. So the first stanza, it's an order of appearance, is Kayleen and Franklin, then Bruno and Abel, and so on. So that's what that looks like. One of my students decided to use bold. So that one stands out a little bit. And then we've got each stanza as a spread. And this is when the 20 Snowy Mountains, the only moving thing was the eye of the blackbird. And here's my SDSU student, and here is the pack participant. And this was amazing how these two went together. This is the one about, in my mind, I was of 3 minds, like a tree in which there are 3 blackbirds. This is SDSU student. And this is the PAC student.
I love it. I love how it's bigger than the page.
And then, yeah, some of them were just bigger. And so we decided to just make it possible by folding them in. This is the Blackbird World in the Autumn Winds. It was a small part of the pantomime. So it's always. Now, some of the pairings we did because there was a sympathy between the styles. This is a man and a woman are one, a man, a woman, and a blackbird are one. So that's my student, and this is the tax student. I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of inflections or the beauty of innuendos, the blackbird singing or just after. There were a lot of really good submissions on that one. This one has a keyhole with an eye looking out through it. This one's amazing. I hadn't seen each other's work before. And this one, the famous one. So the contrast between inside and outside. This is the river is moving, the blackbird must be flying. And the last one. It was evening all afternoon. It was snowing and it was going to snow. The blackbird sat in the cedar limbs. I don't want to, I want to just hurt the book. And then this is the page that tells you who, what, when, where, why. And then this beautiful paste paper was made at the end to look like clouds. Slightly not too happy, not too sad, but a little bit of both.
Thank you so much. It's so exciting to see it because it must be hot off the presses because it wasn't even in the gallery a few hours ago when I was there. So yeah, Karina, what do you want to share? Any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Annie and Michelle. I really commend you on your ability to show a book so well on Zoom. I feel like that's probably one of the best Zoom book presentations that I've seen.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah, it was masterful. I know exactly what it's like to turn those pages like that. Yeah, well, I mean, the book is obviously absolutely beautiful. I had a few questions, actually, if that's fine, for you, Michelle, about the project. You know, the book in its physical form, is it a unique book? Is it all one of a kind artwork, or is it editioned in some way?
There's an edition of 20 copies.
Oh, wow. Okay. So yeah, that's something that I think is really fascinating. And as you were turning through the pages, I was struck by the connection to kind of two different, very different lineages in artist books. One of the livre d'artiste, which is the kind of traditional fine press history where poets are paired with visual artists. And so like the whole format of this and the presentation of it really does embody this beautiful elevated object. And at the same time, I was struck by the, I guess, kind of the similarity to the history in zine culture and this tradition of like zine collation clubs where artists would, make 20 copies or 50 copies of a certain drawing or a poem or something and all send it to the same place and then have it put together. And so I think there's something really beautiful about having so many different artists contributing to the same book and creating this kind of communal space for distribution. One of the things that I think is so important about the book as a medium, and probably why it seems to be so important in for artists who are currently experiencing incarceration or are in the process of recovery, is that it really is a medium that provides amplification. It gives the artist the opportunity to not only show off that one painting that they made or that one drawing, but it really gives the opportunity for the work, that expression, the process to be distributed in multiples. So I really appreciate what you've done, Michelle, and the way that it is something that's come just outside of the walls of that place where those people are being held right now, and also going outside of the lives of the students. It's going to have a much larger and longer history. So I think that's one of the most important things about the book as a medium.
Thank you so much. It's so interesting to hear about the different types that it relates to, and something that we have seen over time that Michelle responded to in such a really gracious way is that once we often do show artwork from participants because they ask to have it seen in the world. I always remember one participant who said, I want you to show our art because I want people to know we're not all bad and evil, which really struck me because I was like, of course you're not, but everyone doesn't necessarily think that. So that was their goal in showing their work. So we would show art, we've had exhibitions, but then they said, well, what happened? We want to know, because obviously they can't see them. So we started trying to give something back to show them. And so Michelle and your students and some of the PAG team are creating, like a smaller book that will go to each artist. So they will get not that book, but a more like maybe a zine, I think. I don't know. Is that?
I think that's actually a really interesting thing that you're bringing up, Annie and Michelle. I think that's really important that the artists, in the prison system right now are able to access a copy of this. And in projects that we've done at Center for Book Arts, with the aim of bridging incarcerated individuals and artists and writers on the outside, there is kind of like a limitation on what you can send back and forth. And so I'm really curious, when these artists eventually are, outside, if they're able to spend time with this beautiful object that you and your students have produced, and what their response would be to that.
Hopefully that will happen.
There'll be a copy in the SDSU library into perpetuity. And each of my students will keep one. And so they'll go out beyond. My students have just been so inspired and so respectful, so touched. And they've treated the art by the participants so respectfully. It's been a great experience.
I mean, that's interesting, like thinking of your students' response who maybe, maybe had experience with criminal justice system, maybe didn't, we don't know. I've definitely had students who have in the past or who have not, but to open up that door for them to learn about that or think about these individuals in a different way, I think is really can broaden their understanding and is part of the goal that artist I told you about who said several years ago that he wanted us to show his art because to kind of shift stereotypes about individuals experiencing incarceration. So James, I wonder if you want to like speak a little bit more about that. What do you think that it might do for criminal justice reform or for individuals in the system if this kind of interaction were more common? Does it
I
help?
know that when you're locked up and you're put away, most people they've forgotten. And any recognition from the outside world, it helps you mentally. So and some of the best art I've ever seen has been behind the wall. It's like an untapped resource that was like it wasn't nurtured on the street. And you're doing time and all you have is time. So I've seen somebody trade a piece of art they worked on for maybe 48 hours for a $6 case of soups because he doesn't have anybody on the outside that is taking care of him. And he used to say that he draws for bread and meat because his art would get him food. They just like anybody, they just want to be recognized. And when you put somebody away, I'd relate it akin to like the middle child syndrome. Is if there's nobody that loves you, that recognizes you, you go somewhere else and you look for other people that are going to recognize you and pay attention to you. And unfortunately, that's what happens that leads down that road that you end up in prison is that it's I'm from the era of the latchkey kids that came home and nobody was home because both parents had to work, or that one parent that you had to work. So you were left to your own devices, while they were at work and until they came home. And it led to the street. If your family's not operating correctly, you find a different family. You find somebody who will pay attention to you. And unfortunately, it's usually the older kids and they steer you wrong and you stay on that path. And so I hope that the artists that are inside, they're going to receive some type of recognition. I don't know if this could possibly play on institutional TV, like some of the plays that we did. They'd be able to see that their work made it, and people are talking about it. There's discussions. Their work is going to be in the library at SDSU. I mean, that alone is phenomenal. I can imagine how I would feel if, I got involved in this project and next thing you know, my work is in a book and on a shelf at SDSU. That would be life-changing. It would make me want to pursue it further. And so I think it's very important that they're acknowledged.
Thank you. That's such a great point. And they will receive like their own book if we get approval, but usually the prisons give us the approval. So we've always been able to give those back. So they'll be getting that back, but maybe if it's not finished yet, maybe that's a good tip for Michelle to also maybe add that it's going to be in the library if it's not already, because that's a really good point. And that's a great idea. I mean, I'd have to check with Eric and Elizabeth and see, but if they're willing and we can get it onto the CDCR TV, that's such an interesting idea, either the panel or just flipping through the book. We have created about 12 arts and mindfulness instructional videos that are playing like that we did during COVID. So good thoughts about that. Maybe we can get it in another way. Since we do have a number of faculty and students here on the call, and a reminder to folks to please put your questions in the chat. We will have time for some of them, so please put those in there for anyone, and we will get to those soon. But I wonder, Alan, is there other things that faculty and students can do to build awareness, you know, of the people inside the correctional institutions, and not just this idea of like mass incarceration, right? But that these are our community members inside there, and also maybe to help reduce stigma and stereotypes. Like what might you recommend?
Wow. Yeah, I think there's a lot that we can do. And one thing that I'd like to say to kind of piggyback on what James was saying, so much of what I think we've been discussing, and in particular what I heard in James's sharing, is how prison is such a desolate place, right? It's so lacking in enrichment, but people are starving, right, for connection, for recognition, for the ability to show who they are. And so we've been talking at this level of just of survival, right, for a human being. To be able to bring something of their whole selves. I think when we start talking about rehabilitation programs, right, like the ones that PAC are doing, and the ones that I'm involved in, we're really going beyond that, right? We're going beyond the survival level, and we're getting to a place where people who are experiencing incarceration can really know that they're being seen, and that they can see each other, and in that new discovery, and that goes beyond race, and that goes beyond classification. You know, for example, in prison, there's just inmates, correctional officers, and some other staff, and everyone's supposed to really stay in their own lane. But when folks begin to open up through exposure to these personal development type curriculums, such as the arts, then they're really able to get way beyond that. And maybe for the first time in their lives, since so many people that we find in prisons have come from neighborhoods that are nearly as impoverished as the prison settings themselves. So as poignant and perhaps sad as it may be, some people find art and connection and a sense of wholeness in themselves. They find it in prison, right, for the first time. And it's exactly these kinds of programs that can provide those openings. And so this is part of the message that I think that we can bring as faculty members to our students, and that we can bring to the general community, that this first basic understanding that people who are incarcerated are people, right? Both the folks who work there and the folks who are serving sentences there, right? That they're people, fully complex, right, with the full range of emotions, same hopes and dreams as everybody else. So there's that first level of understanding, but then, you know, it just goes so much beyond, like that someone can say the greatest art they've ever seen, right? The most beautiful poem they've ever heard. And then even sometimes the most beautiful sunrise you've ever seen, right, could happen within a correctional facility. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff that doesn't exactly jive with our popular understanding of prisons and who's in them and who's working in them. So I think that we all can take a step back, you know, from the stereotypes, acknowledge the humanness and the commonality of our experiences. And now more than ever, there's web-based resources, as well as stuff you can find in libraries, but lots of websites that are showing prison art, prison literature, prison tours, videos made in prisons. Once upon a time in California, during the era prior to Schwarzenegger, inmates were not allowed to be filmed or interviewed in any kind of way. They could even speak to news media. So those kinds of restrictions have been either lifted or expanded a great deal. That now there are many films that you can find at film festivals or online, full length documentaries that have been made on the prison experience and its aftermath, and many much shorter features that focus on different programs or activities that are occurring in prisons. So for folks who want to do the research and look, yeah, there's plenty out there to be seen. And so now it's we have more of an opportunity than ever to step beyond stereotypes and start embracing the wholeness of the folks who both serve in our name by working in prisons and that are doing custodial sentences inside.
Thank you so much. So helpful, informative, and I hope, if folks are listening and want to get involved, those are some ideas that you could actively do, or even just start to think about in terms of what how you think about this population who are our community, right? They're part of our community. Amazing. So I will also say, I didn't think of this before. I guess it's a little bit of a commercial, but we have a class called Art and Restorative Justice in Art and Design, in which students and faculty co-teach arts classes in the prisons. And we also have another class this summer with Jess that will also be in collaboration with the program that I and another teacher will be leading inside the prisons, and that she and the students will be leading outside. So there's opportunities here at SDSU together with Project Rebound, with the courses I'm mentioning, that you can also get involved. And so one of the things that really struck me that I think would be really interesting for our listeners to hear about is when I was able to visit your class, Michelle, the students showed me how it was that they took the artwork from the artist that they were working with, who had that same stanza, and then they made that piece into a stencil, I believe, or you'll say it probably in more detail, such that it could be printed multiple times. And one of them was telling me how much he felt the connection with that artist through getting to work so closely with that piece to make it be able to be a print. Can you maybe share more about how that was done and how your students responded to that? You're muted, Michelle.
I can share my screen. Elizabeth Allison took a video of them working. Would you like to see that?
Yeah. Sounds great.
All right. Hang on. Whoop. I just have to be able to click the arrow. There we go. Yes, that's it.
That is so great.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That is really great. I hadn't looked at it yet.
Do you want to unshare?
Yep.
Awesome. That is amazing. I really like that video, Elizabeth. Thank you. Awesome. And I think you spoke a bit about the students' response. The thing that, so there's a couple of thoughts for anyone who wants to jump in, a little bit more open-ended questions. The first one is, it kind of follows on what you just shared, and you could speak from the student's perspective or the, artists in PAC. They're all students, just in different places. How do the arts promote an experience of healing for people? So not even just in experiencing incarceration, how do the arts promote healing for people? How does something like engaging in this process build a bridge and create some form of healing? Does anybody want to speak about that? Jess does.
Yeah, I'll just briefly, I think I want to talk about non-ordinary states and how even if you can't get into a state that feels like it's conducive to good art making, you feel like your brain's all over the place, or somehow the engagement in it, even if you're in a kind of self-judgment place, somehow the continued engagement in it, and in particular engagement in art that is engaging with other people's art, that it's a physical experience. I mean, I'm coming from a dance perspective, but I mean, any art making, it's an embodied experience. And so just changing your mind state and allowing the art to do that, it disrupts the pattern just enough that you could maybe then be open to seeing what the art says back to you about yourself or the world that you didn't intend. Yeah, so that's just one piece. And then I think I want to speak a little bit, Alan, when you were speaking, it was so like about the humanizing and about stereotypes. You know, there's something about seeing the art of someone, you know, that was done in a prison. You see the art and you, it just undercuts any attempt, any possibility of stereotyping in a way. It's like, you don't see the person, you see something deeper, like some kind of essence. And so there's something that kind of, again, breaks us out of the ordinary way of relating that I think kind of just cracks it open so that the healing could potentially happen. Because there's something about healing and art making that what they have in common is kind of like get out of your own way. You know, how do you get out of your own way? And how do you let it happen? How do you create the conditions for it to happen? You know, the harder you're working at it, the more, you know, I don't know. So I just want to, point to that thing that they have in common. Something about non-ordinary states of consciousness.
Thank you. That's so interesting. That's so, I think that's so true that you sometimes have to just do the thing to get out of your like doubt or questions or uncertainty. And it's interesting to try to create a space for that within the context of a prison where that's definitely not, as James was speaking about earlier, like the norm. So to try to sort of create that oasis. Does anyone else want to speak about that? Yeah, Karina.
So, Jess, I absolutely understand what you're saying because I grew up as a dancer and, you know, I'm a practicing artist. And so, yes, there is something really amazing about just the process of doing and being in a different mental state. I also wanted to speak to something that I see in artists who are working in the book specifically as a medium. And, you know, the book as an art form, it has different audiences. I think we're all familiar with the, you know, the audience of the self, where you're journaling or you have a sketchbook or you have a diary and you're using that as a place for safe expression. And I think that that's one thing that I see artists use a lot as a place for just kind of a no judgment space, which seems to be, you know, something that's so important and vital to our mental health. And, you know, it sounds like from what James is saying that it's sometimes hard to find that in, you know, when you're on the other side of the wall. But I think that there's something also really interesting to the other side of the book as a medium, which is the act of making public, and touches on something that I think James started to mention when he was referencing like how special it is to have something in a library. And I think that, you know, when a book is made public, you know, when you're transitioning from that space where you're making art for yourself in your safe space, and then you're going to a place where you're making multiple copies. And maybe you're just making a zine, you're printing it off, or maybe you're even like reproducing it multiple times by hand. But when you create something to go out into the world, it somehow changes. It gets this aura of importance or authority, or I don't really know. The book has a specific place in our culture. which is, you know, a place for storing knowledge and communicating. And, you know, the idea of the book as an art form, you know, that can act from, you know, this very intimate personal level to a much larger scale where maybe you're producing, you know, at Kinko's or, you know, whatever photocopy shop, you know, several hundred copies of, you know, just some of your poetry even, or even some doodles, and you're getting that out into the world, that really changes the way that, you know, you see yourself as somebody who is, you know, valued, and that can be seen by multiple people, or deserves to be seen by multiple people. And it also changes the way that people see you. And so I think that the book as an art form is a really valuable medium for, yeah, just expression and growth. So, you know, even just starting in that journaling and then moving on as you grow and feel more comfortable to making public.
Thank you so much. I like that idea, like from the journal, which, as you say, can be such a more private healing, to that transition to a public space of a book. It's so interesting. Does anyone else want to reflect on that idea about art and how it can help with healing or emotional growth?
Well, I like what James said about just being seen. And I think when you see art that resonates with you, then you know there's someone out there, even if it was in the past, or somebody you don't know, that shares your, I don't know, perception style, or is, you know, I always love it when I see dark art because I'm kind of dark in my art, and I was never allowed to be dark, you know, in my family. So, you know, that just makes me feel so much more a part of the human experience, and that's okay. And that was healing. That can be healing too, I think. Or even people that are whimsical and crazy and they find somebody else doing that, you know, like my brother's more of a whimsy. He's a poet in New York, and he really resonates with Keith Haring's work. You know, and he did a children's book about Keith Haring, and he does murals in the style of Keith Haring at the schools. And so he feels like at home in that, with those things. And I find that healing. I also find, you know, just being able to focus on one thing, making something for a prolonged period of time, is a great joy, a source of great joy for some reason. And peace. And I get that on some of the pack drawings, they'll say things like that. You know, just being able to do this drawing took me out of the prison, you know, for the first time in a long time. You know, I went somewhere else. Alternative reality, but nonetheless a true reality.
I think that's ultimately it, right? Like it can take us to another space, in a space of a certain type of freedom. And so once I remember this interesting experience, we were at with our students in one of the prisons, and they were showing some artwork, and it's one of the only 2 prisons that I know of in California that has its own art studio. And he was showing this piece, and they already made so much art. We're like, well, I don't know what we can add to this conversation. So we kind of brought in like art history and art interpretation, because they were already creating artwork of their own and had a lot of skills in painting and drawing. So anyway, he put out his artwork, and we just started interpreting it as you do as artists and in our class. And you talk about what you see and what it means to you. And he was just like flabbergasted. He was like so shocked, and in a good way. And he was like, how did you know? How did you know that that's what it was about? And so that idea that you can communicate something visually and people can understand it, I think that really spoke to me in a different kind of way about how it can be healing, and that you can be seen, you can be understood from something internal that you maybe couldn't put into words, and then other people like saw and heard it in a sense. So
And
I wonder, yeah, go for it. I was gonna jump to you.
Yeah, to add to that, really, that and I guess maybe underline something that's been implied, and that is that in creating art for oneself as a therapeutic endeavor or as personal exploration, that's one thing, and then to share it with others, right? To put it out there, such a different thing, right? To go from journaling to presenting a painting or something, or presenting a short story, and so I think as we're mentioning, like Annie, as you're talking about offering interpretation or critique, is probably very much framed as praise, right? And something positive and encouraging for the individual who's producing something, because as we all know, to put something out there means there's this opportunity for it to be judged. And, you know, if it needs to be said, prison is a place of the judged, right? Like that's why you're there, is that you were judged harshly, you were found wanting, and you've been put away, right? Set into some kind of an exile. And then while there, prison is just the furthest you can get from a judgment-free zone, right? It is full of judgment. There's rules on everything, from how you look, how you dress, to how you act, to what you can possess. There's so many rules that virtually nobody could make it through an hour, right, without violating a rule. And that then there's also the inmate code, or the social society, the informal type of rule. So it is an extraordinarily rule-bound and judgment-bound place. And so for somebody to be able to transcend that in some way, or to be able to own that in some way, where they can create something to put it out there, and be willing to accept further judgment, that's got to show some amazing degree of growth and risk-taking and vulnerability, I would think.
That's really interesting to hear you say that, because it is oftentimes with each other, they're very like looking at the technical and like whether it's like quote unquote good or right, like that's kind of how they speak about it. And we weren't looking at it that way. We were just saying what it was communicating to us, and that was so different for them. And they were like, it's magical, how do you know? And it's like, because that's what you put into this piece, like it does communicate. So it was really interesting and different from the way they like thought about critique. So that really rings true.
Karina, when you were searching for that word that someone may, or how someone may feel when they have something that's actually in a book, I think that to that person, the book would become alive to them, because it becomes part of them, And so when you're behind the wall and your art makes it back out, and people are, just like Alan said, they're able to judge it, they can see it. If it's just temporarily, you become part of the world again. Because trust me, it's a micro society in there that is not part of anything out here. But there's a government, there's a structure, there's just how Alan was describing, there's levels, there's roles that you must play, there's things not to do, the informal rules. But the art does, it opens the door for you to heal. You take a really close look of how you got there. I know me personally, I saw myself as part of the system, and I analyzed the steps that I took to get there, and what steps I won't take the next time. I met people. I think it's important to recognize that society defines crime, defines what crime is, and it defines what a criminal is. And our society is constantly changing. Like I met somebody in there who had a third strike, got caught with a half a pound of weed, and had been locked up for 15 years. And then they legalized weed and let him go. So that is an example of our society changing. And so, you have to question yourself, well, if it wasn't that bad now, why did he do 15 years for a half pound of weed? And I had to start realizing where he thought that was okay, is that before most people realize that they have went through something, they understand that before they were a victimizer, they were a victim. Where they say hurt people they hurt people. People have been hurt, they hurt people. And so taking a closer look at the origins and, you know, the beginning stages of how somebody ends up in prison is important, you know, and through art, it helps them, if they're not going to get the help from, you know, a psychiatrist, you know, they can self-analyze through art. I think it's helpful. It's part of the rehabilitative process without involving the man. You know.
I think that is a perfect way to wrap up our conversation, actually. Thank you so much for that, James. And thank you, Alan and Michelle and Jess and Karina. It was such a pleasure to be with you and just have some time to sit back and reflect on this really fascinating project. But don't go, everyone, because before we go, yes, to share that class this summer is at PSFA 320, Creativity and Communication in the Arts, if you're interested. And the Art and Restorative Justice is in the fall. And I want to thank once again Elizabeth, Allison, and Eric Smigel for hosting this, inviting us, helping us along, creating that beautiful video, and just supporting this and so many projects like it here at SDSU. So thank you both so much. And I'm going to pass it back over to you to wrap us up. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Let's thank our panelists once again for such a stimulating session. We greatly appreciate your time and your insight. The exhibit, Learning to Fly, is open now, and it will remain open through May 3rd in the Flori Canto Gallery in the SDSU School of Art and Design. The closing reception, which will include poetry readings and the dance performance that Jess showed you a video of, will take place in the gallery at some point on May 3rd between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock p.m. TBD, but there's going to be plenty to do in the gallery during those 2 hours for sure. We will be emailing a survey to everyone who registered for this event, and we would be grateful for your response as it helps us to develop and improve our programming. We also hope you attend other events sponsored by One SDSU and Arts Alive SDSU, which you can learn about at one.sdsu.edu and artsalive.sdsu.edu. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of your week.